Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Carol and Liz show. No, it's that early childhood nerd. That's the show. I'm Heather. But I've got Carol Murray, Carol Garboden Murray and Lizz Nolasco here for this show. And I'm just going to let them talk because this is a topic I don't know very much about. But we have a little Facebook chat group for the nerds, and Carol and Liz started talking about this topic of dependency labor a couple of weeks ago, and the rest of us in the chat were just like reading their conversation in awe and reverence. So so now it gets to go out to everybody. So welcome, Carol, and welcome, Liz.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay, so Liz, Carol, maybe we'll start with just the question, what is dependency labor and why did you start the conversation?
Yeah, I think the conversation started with the idea of emotional labor. Liz posted something about emotional labor. There was an article that was talking about women's labor and women being fed up with carrying the burden of sort of all this emotional weight of running a family, this invisible work. And it started this whole conversation about what is emotional labor, what is emotional work, and then we talked about dependency labor. And so the conversation went in a lot of directions.
Yeah, sorry, Liz, didn't give you credit for starting it.
That's okay. I don't need extrinsic motivation.
It did go in a lot of different ways, and it was so interesting for me to read your conversation, but I didn't have the background that you both were working off of for the conversation. So can we talk first about then the starting point, that emotional labor article? Liz, you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think the reason that it stood out to me and the reason why I brought it to the nerd chat was because it was such an interesting, so the article, or the quote from the article that I pulled for the nerd chat that I'm going to greatly abridge here, is the interviewer asking Hochschild, which I hope is the name of the Hochschild, okay, who created the concept of emotional labor. So the interviewer asks, is it emotional labor to manage household Christmas merriment, like Christmas cards, baking cookies, and planning family get-togethers? And Hochschild says, there seems an alienation or disenchantment of acts that normally we associate with the expression of connection, love, and commitment. And then the line that really just hit me was, I feel a strong need, or like, oh, what a burden it is to pick out gifts for the holidays for my children. I feel a strong need to point out that this isn't inherently an alienating act, and something's gone haywire when it is. It's okay to feel alienated from the task of making a magical experience for children. I'm not judging that. I'm saying let's take it as a symptom that something's wrong. And so that led to this larger conversation of emotional labor and dependency labor, and just the way that those are in, all of our paid and unpaid work lives.
Yeah. So maybe I sort of started this and then got off of it. Maybe we need to do a couple of definitions, just straight definitions of what we're talking about when we talk about emotional labor and dependency labor, because those certainly aren't terms that were in my vocabulary last year at this time.
Yeah. So emotional labor came from, really people started talking about that in the workforce. So Hochschild was studying sort of manipulating your own emotions or being required to act emotionally in a certain way or manipulate the emotions of others at work. She was looking at when we get paid to represent the company, we have to smile, we have to make people feel good, that this kind of labor often is more directed towards women. And then she started sort of analyzing that kind of expectation in the workplace. And it made me think, when I read her studies, it made me think a lot about childcare, right? She was talking even about airline attendants and saying we can say it's manipulative because maybe Delta Airline or whoever they're looking at wants people to feel good and wants you to buy a ticket and wants you to fly on their plane and not someone else's plane. But there are also other reasons that emotional expectation is really important, because you're responsible for keeping all these people that are boxed inside of this airplane safe, right? So there's a really big responsibility to take care of people and make people feel safe and happy when they're flying, so that we all land safely into the destination where, so it's more than just manipulative, like, you work for Disney and Disney owns you and you have to make people feel good. And it's a commodification of emotion, that there is something else that we could look at in terms of sort of our human exchange and the power of emotions. But she was really looking at it in the workforce. And then she talks about, nursing and hospice care and childcare workers and counselors, and just analyzing this is just an interesting thing to think about, that we are required to have a certain emotional intelligence, and we are required to maybe sometimes suppress our own emotions and to make other people feel a certain way at work. And then
I actually first, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I first came to the term as emotional labor actually in personal lives. So it was really interesting for me to realize that, this is talking about paid labor initially. So I sorry to jump in there, but it was my first understanding of it was really from a differently feminist perspective. I feel like that initial definition is very firmly feminist as well. But my first encounter with it was this really broad definition that Hochschild does not seem to necessarily agree with, but understands that it has been taken in this direction to really all interactions rather than just professional. So I just wanted to jump in and say that.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So she's been saying how it's been a broader concept, especially during the pandemic, with so many women staying home, so many women leaving the workforce, but still managing families and taking, the primary responsibility for the emotional running of the family, right? So she was, I think some people were trying to call it emotional work, that it's just the normal everyday work that we do as humans when we're caring for our own families and children. And it does fall more on the shoulders of women. And then emotional labor, she was analyzing it more from that perspective of places where we get paid and our emotions come into it and are important. And you look for a certain disposition or temperament for certain professions, I guess. So that's what that was about.
And dependency labor, do we want to just go ahead and talk about what that means now?
Sure.
Since we'll use both terms.
Yeah. So then I was coming up against the term dependency labor, reading some of the feminist care ethics work, and specifically Eva Kate, who has a whole book it's called Love's Labor, and it's all about dependency. And it was just fascinating to me because she was talking about the varying degrees of dependency labor, that, when you're caring for a baby, they depend upon you for their very life, right? I mean, and those of us who care for young children as our profession, we know that we are sort of the essential workers of the essential workers, right? We can't walk away from our job. We can't, I think of the example, like here on my campus, the president will put out a memo that says, we want to honor the workers, meet us for lunch today. We're going to have a potluck, blah, blah, blah. Well, we can't walk out of the childcare center because we're taking care of So it's the real dependency. Someone is depending upon me for their very life. I have to have my eyes on these children. I have to be holding the baby. And then someone might be disabled. There might be a disabled person who has all sorts of ability but needs someone to, that maybe they don't have use of their limbs, needs someone to help them get on the toilet, or needs someone to help them, fix their dinner, or so different levels of dependency. And she was looking, and then elder care and the crisis, that the more dependent an individual is, the more ethical their practice needs to be, because there's this asymmetrical relationship where you really have to interpret a lot of their needs, and you have to care for them in a way that is dignified and honoring their worthiness as a human. But she is sort of analyzing how the more dependent a person is, our society tends to think that they're less less worthy.
Yes.
And so the people who take care of the babies, the people who assist individuals with disabilities, the people who take care of elders, are the people who are usually the lowest paid in our society. And how does that relate to maybe the way we value individuals, because we think of this rugged individualism as being the mark of worthiness or success in our culture.
Right. Yeah, everybody just pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Not thinking about the ones who need help with their bootstraps. And this is the physical impossibility of lifting yourself up by your own bootstraps. What are you waiting to say, Liz?
Oh, sorry, I had a third of a thought and then it kind of vanished. Just this idea of the care workers being the lowest paid just kind of triggered this sense of the dichotomy of, well, yeah, sure, everyone can do it, and also that nobody really wants to do it, or certainly not everybody wants to do it, right? This idea of anyone can do it, and also I am better than that.
Yeah. I do feel like a lot of our sometimes like teacher appreciation efforts and rhetoric is less about you really are important and the people you're caring for deserve that, and more, I'm so glad I don't have to be the one to do that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point, Liz, what you're saying about that. It's thought of as the work that anyone could do, but it might be, I don't know, it might be the hardest, right? That delicate partnership that you need to have with someone when you're there. The relationship is asymmetrical, right? They are depending upon you for something that the rest of us take for granted, or the rest of us think of as a sort of human capacity or human right. They're depending on another being. I mean, the dependency that Kate talks about is just acknowledging we are always all dependent upon each other. We are always, and at different times in our life, more dependent upon each other than at other points. But even when we think we're independent, we are intricately connected and dependent. I don't grow my own groceries, I don't pave the roads. I don't, we need each other. And
I was just thinking about that as I was driving home today, because I own a car. I know how to drive. I have a driver's license, but my drive home from work is still completely dependent on a million other factors. The other drivers, the roads being there, just the city planning that went into all of this. So maybe not literally a million, but there is literally nothing that we do without depending in some way on somebody else, either doing or having done.
Yes.
And there's such a strong American ethic of, just like you said, about individualism and that disconnect from our interdependence. This idea of, the children need childcare and the elders need elder care. And often the person who is doing other things and this needs to outsource said care is somehow taken out of the equation, is benefiting from these other people, from the labor of other people.
Yeah, it's interesting from like a relationship or a reciprocal perspective too, to think about what we get when we care for someone. You want it to be partnership, you want it to be reciprocal. So she talks about her own child. Kate has a child with a severe intellectual disability, and talking about how that child is valued, and how she had to hire someone to care for her child so that she could then step into the labor force. So there's just all, and so she gets into talking about this triangle between her disabled child, and this caregiver who comes to live with them, and how that triangle became sort of a this triad of support, of care, of love, all the emotions that entered into such a relationship of dependency, the three of them. And it made me then think about, like, when we hire childcare workers, we do expect them to care and love children, and that idea of professional love, right? That when we care for children, we fall in love with them. It's such an interesting thing to think about. And I know some people don't like the word professional love because they think, are we going to start making up a checklist about how we have to love children? This is something that can't be measured.
These are our love standards.
These are our love standards, exactly. but I think the reason Jules calls it professional love is because, again, it's different from the parental love or the family love, because you are getting paid to do it. And there is and like Lizz says, it's not something anyone can do. You could make a checklist about how to touch children, how to gaze at children, how to engage children, how to care for children. We don't want to put it on a checklist, but you can you can professionalize it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, I think so much of our idea of professionalism, my idea of what's professional and what's not, is difficult to describe and measure. But I know it when I see it, that old phrase. But I don't know, checklists ruin everything.
Yes. So I think I don't know. I think there's a lot to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, I don't know. I was just thinking about with some of the application is to hospice care, and some of the research that has been done has said, there's different levels of emotions, like almost like like a surface acting, where we can learn how to be congenial and responsive to someone, and then there's a deeper way of acting when we're caring for someone, and the research is saying that deeper way of entering into authentic exchange and authentic relationship with an individual is the kind of professional behavior that sustains you, because it's an authentic reciprocal exchange. You really can be yourself when someone is dying or someone is giving birth or you're caring for a child. You really can. If you can enter into the deeper, authentic relationship in that dependency labor, you're less likely to burn out.
Yeah.
Where if you learn,
I'm sorry, no, keep going, Carol. You just wonderful thing.
No, go, Lizz, go.
We're done. Okay. That was where I got so turned around in my head and sent those walls of text, right? Where it was, well, this is labor in that we're getting paid, but also this is joy, and I'm kind of uncomfortable calling these joyful interactions and the best parts of my job labor, even though in a very technical sense they are. And to be a good parent who is not getting paid, who is doing this dependency care work, are they also engaging in labor? Is labor at home distinct? And I think most people would argue yes, but also, when is it labor? When is it being an interdependent human? When is it existing? And I guess that's where I'm still kind of getting turned around.
Do you think that stems from just the general, just from capitalism in general? Like, it's the difference between work and fun, or work and joy, work and happiness, all they need to be, like, if you're having fun, something's wrong. In terms of a job, or you should just love kids enough to do it well all the time, even if you feel bad, even if you don't really like it. Like, I feel like there's a lot of puritanical stuff and capitalism stuff in this conversation about,
and you can
about labor and love.
It is. It's so deep, and you can see why there's so many cultural wars around childcare, right? And care in general, because of the place of a woman, the gender roles. Like you said, the mundane of washing dishes or feeding a baby isn't supposed to be considered joyful. It's just, the boring stuff. But we who care can find joy in preparing the meals and in holding the babies and playing with the children. We find so much joy in that. And so, but we're getting paid for it. I know what you're saying. And I go down that, like work in general, like, think about the other service jobs we've done in our lives, or we had other people do. If you're serving food at a restaurant or handing someone their groceries, you feel so much better when that exchange is genuine.
Mhm.
When you have a connection with that person who's setting the food in front of you or handing you the groceries, or any kind of service exchange brings us into contact with someone else and
Mhm.
reminds us of our dependency and reminds us of our opportunity to be human and to need each other and to appreciate each other. So we can't put work in a hierarchy that some is more important than the other. I think when you look at it through the lens of care ethics, you just keep coming back to that human exchange, how we're so connected.
Yeah. And I wasn't trying to argue with you, Liz. I just was trying to kind of see where that comes from. You know, it's sort of like I think it comes from the same place that says if children are playing, they aren't learning. Like, you know, if it's not uncomfortable and controlled, then it can't really be meaningful.
Right. Yeah. Because I guess the inborn definition in my mind is exactly what you pointed out that I didn't realize. So there, labor isn't joyful. Labor can't be joyful, whether that's at home caring for my child, it's at work caring for other people's children.
Yeah.
And they feel so distinct because we've been taught that they're supposed to be.
Yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned, Carol, in the email you sent Liz and I yesterday, whenever that was, and you kind of touched on this. Oh, wait, I have to find it again now. You said, I also think about care ethics and what it means when we operate with care as a moral code. So you've kind of already talked about that a little bit, but I wanted to hear both of you kind of flesh that out a little bit. What does that mean? What do you
the care is a moral code. Like every time you have an opportunity to care for someone or be cared for or to enter in the relationship of dependency, even if it's someone pumping your gas, right? Like, do you recognize at that point that this is our human strength? Or do you do you have like a hierarchy as some work being, and I think some work being more important than the other, or some work being mundane, or you know, we all have different gifts and different ways that we serve each other, if we acknowledge it. But I was just thinking also like that first wave of feminism, where all these women went into the workforce, and then the people who were caring for their children felt subjugated. You know, they felt almost used or stepped upon, or not seen, still not seen. So this hierarchy of work, and it's just interesting. I don't have any answers. I'm just thinking about it all.
Yeah. That's cool. Pausing for Liz, but maybe she isn't gonna go.
Oh no, sorry.
I just know you won't jump in like everyone else jumps in, so I've got to pause a little bit. So for me, I mean, I just thought as you were talking, even within like a child care center, traditionally, you know, kind of a traditional classroom where there's a lead teacher and an assistant teacher and a closer, and the lead teachers often are seen as having the important work because they're there in the morning when the lesson plan stuff happens. And the others are less than because they're doing most of the care stuff and the diaper changing and the playing while you wait for children to be picked up. And I see this, what you guys are both talking about kind of globally, you can see in early childhood settings a lot of times. Or
even within even within these environments where we would think that care could be honored and elevated, and really talked about as the essential educational exchange between the adult and the child. Even in those environments, there's the hierarchy, or the separation of work.
Separation maybe is a better word for
separation.
For what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
And I think when we're looking at caring as an ethical basis, it kind of brings me back to this idea that I've sort of always held, that we're depriving people of being part of that caring in a lot of ways and a lot of times. I think there are so many, I mean, there's obviously a massive and important distinction to be made between parentifying a child versus allowing them to experience the joy of, you know, giving their younger sibling a bottle or patting their back. But I think that we deprive everybody of this for myriad reasons. There are just so many it's just not thought about to begin with, right? As something that people should experience, that's good for them to recognize, that's helpful for them, right? It's good for you to recognize when you're caring for other people, and it's good for you to have those experiences early on and throughout your life to be able to be in a position to care for others, rather than again, this viewpoint of, you're a child, your job is to focus on school and get good grades, and we'll do the dishes, you do the soccer team. Those ideas of like, this is your job, this is my job, but they don't get to practice any of it.
Right.
Yeah, because it is often so separated, and then like you said, you do the homework, I'll do the dishes, separating it again in your home life. And we do that even in like preschool, like the job chart, making it a job instead of thinking about how we all care for each other and participate in all the rituals together throughout the day. That it almost makes it like, the dirty work. I didn't make that mess. I don't want to clean it up. The kids will say, it's like, it's your job. You need to show me you're responsible. You're learning to be responsible.
It just makes me think of when my kids were young and we didn't have a whole lot of money, but when we had money, they would get, a little cash for a chore every now and again. And when we didn't, I would just tell them, well, this is just for the good of the family. This is just your participation in the family. So they got to the point where like Curtis would be ready to take some trash out to the dumpster. And he's like, all right, is this a money task or a good for the good of the family task? And that was really eye-opening for me at the time, because I was like, no, this really should just be like, they should have an allowance just for their, they have a right to have property or whatever.
Yeah.
And the work should maybe just be part of being in the family.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And that's so culturally variable. There's beautiful research, and I don't know why her name is escaping me. Barbara, I think the last name starts with S, has done a lot of research in Guatemala and Latin America regarding collaboration and community care, and how children in Latin America are broadly just expected to help out with maintaining the home, for example, whereas in the US, we make this distinction between chores and the rest of life, and consequently children and adults grow to hate chores because that's the thing that someone tells you to do, instead of just, this is how I participate in my home.
That's true.
So can we shift over now to talking about, we've touched on it of course already, but talking about how these ideas of emotional labor and dependency labor fit the context of early childhood or of childcare programs.
Yeah. I think it's just nice. It's nice to know people have talked about this and have studied this. It helps me to think about the work as dependency work.
Yeah.
Because it is different from teaching older children, right? We always say early childhood is unique. And that's one of the things that makes it unique, is that we're going to have a more intimate encounter with children because they are children. And we're going to also have that triangle with their family, if we're really thinking about what the purpose of dependency labor. So to me, it gives me more sort of, I don't know, it makes me feel better about my role in helping the child form a strong attachment and have mental images of their family when they're away. And it makes me feel better about my role in experiencing my deep emotions and authentic interactions with kids. So I think that we've always been so concerned with aligning ourselves as teachers with the educational system, K through 12 or whatever. And it helps me step away from that and see it as a kind of a completely different field with different aims and goals, and dependency being really at the heart of the philosophy of the way that we can build communities for children that are healthy. And also, like Liz said, it's not something anyone can do, that we can develop the science and the art of dependency labor. I mean, just to dream about a world where people who were engaged in dependency labor, whether you were supporting a person with a disability or an elder or a baby, that those people would be given, special acknowledgement that we would have a national healthcare system for all the dependency
Yes.
workers, because we are really such the integral infrastructure, the strength of kind of keeping the world turning, which we saw during COVID. It's just, it is a different, for me, it's a different way to think. And also to name the emotional labor, to recognize that there is a requirement, an emotional requirement to do this work well. And like Liz says, it takes you down that tunnel of, okay, what am I getting paid for? What am I doing? What am I doing as a job? What am I doing as a human? Just because I'm a decent human, what am I doing from joy? And what is natural? What is intuitive? And what am I learning? I don't know. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. It made me kind of think differently about, because I've always been very uncomfortable with the whole idea of parent involvement and family teacher relationships being very focused on the power of the teacher and the things we need from families for them to prove that they're involved. Because for me, then it shifts a little bit. And I think this mom, this dad, whoever it is, depends on me to be able to do what they are doing for their own personal fulfillment, to do what they're doing for their customers who need them, to do what they're doing for their own family security and health. And it takes, I'm always trying to take power out of the relationships. And I think thinking about it through this lens really helps me think of an authentic way to really be in community with families and not tricking them into engagement, which is what I feel like a lot of times.
Yes. And I think keeping dependency at the center of our framing is so helpful when you have challenging interactions with families, right? When you realize that, okay, at the end of the day, we're both responsible in some manner for this small dependent person, and we both want what's best for this person, and their methods might be different than mine. They might not yet trust that I can provide for this person. So I really need to put in then the emotional labor to work with that parent to demonstrate, yes, I do care about your child. I am building a relationship with you and your child. And I think kind of from the conversation earlier, right? That's where I've noticed that the hard part is really demonstrating to the grown-ups that, no, this is a partnership. I want to work with you. I want to support you. And I'm going to be the professional who continually extends the olive branch, smiles and says good morning every day, even if you're not up for it. And just, I'm here for you. I'm here for your family. And that's what I do.
Yeah.
It kind of brings you back to that kind of a more natural tribal way of communal way, community way of caring. Even when you think about the way you want to run an organization like a childcare center, like, oh yeah, it's the ratio says I can put you alone with 4 babies, but that's not really humane,
for any of the 5 people in that room.
These babies are depending upon you, and so you need a relationship with that family. You need a relationship with a colleague. You need me to walk in and say, hey, do you need a breather? Do you need to go to the bathroom? It's like, wow, the dependency labor is intense, right? And we can't we have to build our organizations with that, knowing that we need a community, we need each other, we need, we need to acknowledge the emotional labor involved in that kind of work is so important. And burnout, no wonder burnout is so high, right?
Yeah. So how does this idea fit with early childhood practitioners being human beings with real feelings who may not always feel like being caring and happy, and Liz described how she's going to be the one to put on the happy face with the family that maybe there was conflict with. How does that all factor together?
Well, program leadership certainly needs to be understanding of that, and let teachers stay home sick when they're sick, or take a mental health day when they need a mental health day. First and foremost.
Yeah, I think that we do slip in. We do have to maybe understanding there is that range of emotions, that sometimes we do act on a surface level with children when we're not completely present or when we're occupied with our own.
Right.
Right. And that if we're aware that there is a range of deeper authentic emotion and more surface emotion, and the surface emotion operation ironically is what's going to burn us out.
Yes.
So maybe it gives us a tool for sort of evaluating our health.
Yeah.
Like I'm not getting the joy anymore. I'm
Yeah.
just changing 10 diapers in a row and putting on a happy face, and I'm not engaging. So this is not healthy work. But yeah, how do we operate as humans who have that responsibility to regulate, help the child regulate and feel safe and feel the joy in their presence? How do we manage our own emotions? I think we do.
I think so much of that.
Go ahead, Liz.
Sorry, my internet cut out, so I think I stepped on you. I think so much of that has to be programmatic, has to be thought of from the leadership component of these early childhood programs. I had parents used to laugh at me when I had my own classroom because in the morning I'd put on these ridiculous slipper boots that my dad had gotten me years prior. But man, if my feet are comfortable, I'm a much nicer person. I feel more comfortable. I put on my Mr. Rogers, house shoes, and I can step into that, and I have that basic creature comfort, and I'm able to be human and engage. But I mean, I realize it doesn't address the core of burnout and the core of everything else that really interferes. But I think making these comforts priority, taking your teachers into account when you're scheduling or designing, changing up your program in ways that impact their work-life balance is just critical.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah. And the dependency labor, the more dependent a child or individual is, the more we need our colleagues too. So there's that dynamic of like the team has to be functioning well. So if you have a baby room and you have 3 adults working in there, that's 3 adult personalities, and all those babies separating and crying and sleeping and pooping at different schedules. I mean, that is an intense ask. Of
I can say with 100% truthfulness that most of my stressed out days when I was working directly with children came from coworker mismatches, and very rarely about the children or anything that was happening with the children. It was usually either creature comforts or some sort of issue between adults in the space.
That seems like a management issue too for our field. Like, really, it is important how people, you're not going to love everyone you work with, but we need to have some strategies for building strong teams and allowing personality matches. Sometimes you do have a personality match with someone who you can collaborate with better than someone else. It is important.
Yeah. I should fully also acknowledge that I was probably the source of a lot of stress for other adults in the space. We were probably all in a big circle of stressing each other out.
Yep.
Sorry. What else? Anything else? I feel like we've covered a lot. But I don't want to cut it short if there's more.
Yeah, I think it's a lot to think about.
Definitely.
I'll think of something after we get off. But
right. And then we'll just plan another episode about it. Yeah, that's no problem at all.
I was glad Liz brought it up. Like, what is emotional work? What is emotional labor? And like, it's becoming like a catchphrase, right? And I don't think the way it's always being used is helpful to us.
Like so many catchphrases and buzzwords.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I appreciate both of you having that conversation. And I know the rest of us were just kind of looking on in the group. I don't know if you've noticed, I don't feel up to a lot of brainy stuff in the chat. So I'm mostly posting memes these days. But it was so interesting to go back, and look at them again and look at that conversation again and see how you all were processing that. So this has been a good topic for me in terms of being a learner and in terms of being a nerd. So thank you both.
Me too. Thank you for
Thank you
for talking it through. We'll have to keep thinking about it.
Yeah. As Lizz sits in sunny California while I'm in my flannel nightgown in freezing Indiana.
And I'm getting ready for a storm here in
I'm wearing a coat.
Yeah. Oh yeah. New York's about to be hit. Actually, I sort of wish we were getting a storm. We're just getting drizzle and cold. So anyway, thank you for being here. And thanks everyone for listening. Come back again for another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.